I decided, because I had nowhere to be, to enjoy a glass of bourbon, and one glass turned into two, and I eventually got so drunk I couldn't like play video games anymore because like I I I was playing MLB The Show, and MLB The Show requires a lot of very precise inputs, and it was getting to the point where it's like I was still winning games, but like it was a struggle. Like it was way harder than it should be. And I was like, you know what? I can't do this right now. Let me see what's on like Netflix or Amazon. And then I saw the Limey was free on Amazon Prime right now.
No
So
way,
like,
really?
fucking hell, I'm gonna watch this. I have no choice now. And yeah, it once again blew me completely away by like how amazing that movie is. And then just now I was thinking of the scene with Bill Duke as the DEA agent, where he grabs Terrence Stamp and the acting coach, and locks them up in this warehouse, and then Terrence Stamp tries to like explain the situation in a way that allows him to get off scot-free. And it's this really long-winded thing full of like British isms and Cockney rhyming slang. And then Bill Duke is just like, if there's one thing I don't understand, it's every fucking word you're saying. Like, this scene's great.
Oh my god, I need to rewatch The Limey. I watched Hard 8 because Hard 8 was on Amazon Prime.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's another really good one.
Yeah, that
It's
one's
just
funny
like-
because Paul Thomas Anderson never talks about it because I guess it was just such a terrible experience getting it made. But it's so good.
Can't argue with the results. The movie's really good. And it's crazy that that's like his first movie. He's just like, oh, I get to make a movie now, and it's like a solid shiny and chrome.
Yeah. Have you seen Coffee and Cigarettes?
No.
The short? Oh, I think you'll like his short, Coffee and Cigarettes. It feels very much like Hard 8. It's surprisingly good. But it also has his ability to like, he tends to like P.T. Anderson takes like a lot longer to tell a story that could be told a lot shorter, which is not bad, but like that's his trademark. It's like
He's the reverse of Steven Soderbergh, who
yes,
like compresses things to the point where it's like, I remember there was I heard some soundbite of like an editor Soderbergh was working with, or maybe a producer on the Limey. And he was like, and the guy was like, I understand what you're doing, and I appreciate your intent, but I feel like the Limey easily had 10 more minutes.
yeah, the Limey could have been longer.
Mm-hmm. And Soderbergh's like, yeah, probably. It's like, I think I went a little too far with that one.
Well, so much of the story is told like through inference, which is kind of, or the backstory at least is like it's all inference, which is great.
Well, and it's like, I think Steven Soderbergh going too far with that one is what makes it like a masterpiece.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll never forget like Terrence Stamp just walking towards the camera with a gun in his hand, cussing and yelling at the camera. He's like telling everyone to like flee. And then like they play it again later, I think. It's just like, that's anytime I think of the Limey, that's what I think of. I really do need to rewatch it though, because like I'm seeing Terrence Stamp pull up and all this stuff, and I'm like, man, I miss it when Terrence Stamp was like really good in a movie.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy is like the whole movie, editing wise, is like one giant ellipsis. So it's just like all this stuff gets left off, but then all this other stuff gets continually repeated, and it's repeated like out of order in a lot of cases. Like there's this shot of him kind of opening his eyes on an airplane that gets repeated throughout the movie, and you think it's at the beginning because like he flies in at the beginning, but it's actually at the end when he has the conversation with that lady. And there's also like, I think one moment that hit me that didn't hit me the first time because it didn't register was I was just drunk enough to notice this. Like, he talks about how his daughter would always threaten to call the cops on him. And it sort of turned into like a game they would play. It was just like kind of a joke until like the last time she was serious. And that was the last time he ever saw her. And then at the end, when he confronts Peter Fonda's explaining what happened. And he was saying, like, she caught him doing something bad and threatened to call the cops on him. And he's like, she meant it. I didn't know what to do. I had to do something. I knew she meant it. So it's just interesting that it's like, it's like a neat parallel where it's like, with Terrence Stamp, it was always a joke until the end. And then Peter Fonda's like, she meant it. I knew she was going to do it. So we killed her.
We should do an episode. We probably should do an episode. No, we shouldn't. I was going to say we should do an episode on the Limey, but like I feel like it's even more the Limey-ish if we just talk around the Limey and I just put little bits and pieces in every episode that we talk about it, and eventually I'll just cut together a supercut of it. I have to go back to.
We have to make you have to fly out here to LA, and we'll visit locations from the movie and discuss the Limey, but it'll be like all out of order. So it'll be like we'll have one continuous conversation in 3 different places.
And not repeat the same thing every single time.
Yeah.
Or repeat it just slightly differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking
of repeating things slightly differently,
yeah.
Did we talk about The Last Duel?
She went under the wheels.
Perfected.
Welcome to Under the Wheels. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Gabe.
And in today's episode, we administer old school justice while we talk about Ridley Scott's The Last Duel. Ooh, just a coffee sip there. I thought that was so much more clever when I came up with it yesterday. Yeah, let's talk about The Last Duel. I know we were talking about the Limey and 3 storylines going in the same place. Is there any specific spot you want to start?
I don't know, man. You're the host. You gotta come up with this stuff.
Oh, don't worry.
Throwing responsibility onto you.
I got notes. Notes.
Cool. I mean, we could talk about how like half the people in this movie look like they live in Florida.
Yeah.
Like all
or the fact
Matt
that
Damon is
like...
missing is a pair of like wraparound shades, and he's basically riffraff.
It's funny because he had that other movie that came out earlier this year, like Stillwater, where he played as like he's like I'm a middle American kind of guy, and then in this it's like, but you look even more middle American in this middle American hillbilly.
Not even middle American, like he looks like
that's true. It is
Florida
pretty,
man.
Like
he's a
heavy
Florida swamp creature.
Or like the weird areas of Arizona. I feel like they would do that
too.
They have that kind of.
There's like very specific areas of the United States where chin straps are not only acceptable but fashionable.
Yeah.
So he would have to be from one of those areas, but it would not be like the Midwest or coal country.
So I'm playing a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2, and I'm like, why does Matt Damon look like a bad haircut version of Arthur Morgan in this?
Like, let me give Arthur the ugliest fucking haircut possible.
Well, especially like the weird thing is they ended up spending a lot of time like really making sure that when he's away from the house, his hair grows out, because like there are moments when he comes back to the house and like, oh, his weird
Matt Damon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
he's got a full beard when he comes
Yeah.
back from like 3 years of war. And then he immediately goes to the barber and gets the chin strap back.
Yeah, he's like, no, I need to get it cut off before I bang my wife again. Before I, quote, bring pleasure, unquote, to my wife. Oh,
Respect.
my God. It's so funny. The thing she really likes, the chin strap. That's what does it for her. I asked her and she said yes. Like, okay. What's weird is, like, how many parallels, like loose parallels that this movie has to Kingdom of Heaven. So it feels like to me, it feels like a very, very loose spiritual sequel to it, or prequel, I guess.
I just thought this was feminist Rashomon, but I could see that too.
Feminist Rashomon. What do you give The Last Duel rating wise?
You know, it's almost it's tough because I wasn't like blown away by it, but like thinking about it, it's like it's hard to criticize a lot of what it does. It's got to be like a low shiny almost for me.
This movie feels like it, like as I talk about it and as I make like adjustments to it and talk about the quirks and everything, it's gonna sound like this movie should be a shiny and chrome, but as I left the theater, like instantly I was just like, this is such a witness. This is such like a high witness.
Well, it's like while I was watching the movie, I was like, this is probably a witness. And then as I'm leaving, I'm like, it's hard to fault like a lot of what they did. I think it's just like I didn't walk away with as much as I would want to from a shiny and chrome, but it's like otherwise, like my own lack of a reaction aside, it's probably like it's a shiny and chrome. It's weird.
That's the weird part is like I told people like this is the ultimate Matthew movie because it's when it's violent, it's like ultra violent. And it takes place in like medieval-ish times. You know, it's got like knights on horseback. It talks about honor and duty, but also like the other side of it. Like, yes, it's great to like the ideals of being an honorable knight, but then on the flip side, you also have to run your land. And like the juxtaposition that the two main characters who could be very similar, they take these very divergent paths. It's got it's got strong-ish female characters for the time, I guess. And like it has kind of an unconventional narrative structure. But it's got Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, and it's like and Adam Driver, which the weirdest thing is everyone's like, Adam Driver's character is so hot. He's so handsome. And I'm just like, it's Adam Driver.
I know.
Like, what are these guys thinking? Do they equate
They're
the
only
size of their nose to attractiveness?
They made Ben Affleck look ugly.
Yeah, that's true. I think Ben Affleck was originally supposed to play the role of Jacques Legris, but then Ben Affleck was like, people hate me enough. Let's give it to another actor who people actually like, because it's a difficult role.
I thought he was going to say, no, I'm still in rehab. I don't know if I can handle that much.
But yeah, like it has everything in its favor. Like it's Ridley Scott. I think Ridley Scott's best movies are his period pieces because he's so good at like putting you in that sense of place, and he's also
Would Blade
able to,
Runner
like,
be considered a period piece?
No, I would say his science fiction are second, but it's a point of contention because people will be like, but Alien and Blade Runner, and I'm like, I get it, but also Prometheus and and that other Alien movie he did. So yeah, it should be shiny and chrome, but like for some reason I came out of it and I was like, it's got a bunch of stuff that I really, 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 really like, and the execution was about as much or as good as I would expect. It just didn't. It's missing that something.
You know, I'm about to say something that might rile up people who are really pretentious, but it reminds me a lot of Rashomon, not just in the story structure, where it's like the same thing told from a couple different perspectives and it changes each time.
Yeah.
But like, you know, is like The Last Duel is a movie that I think is a shiny and chrome that just didn't quite do it for me. Like, I feel like it's a witness, but really it's a shiny and chrome. And Rashomon is similar, where it's like it's a really well done, good movie that just didn't do it for me. I didn't have that much of a reaction to it. I was like, oh, you know, that was like really well put together, I guess. But like The Last Duel is, I think, Rashomon, but better directed.
Well,
not necessarily because Akira Kurosawa is a bad director, but it's like, given the story that they're trying to tell, all of Ridley Scott's, like, I think all the weaknesses with The Last Duel are with the script more than anything. And Ridley Scott does a really good job on the directing standpoint of like showing each perspective of the same scenes and, you know, using little cinematic techniques to flesh out that perspective in like really meaningful ways. Mm-hmm. Whereas like the different stories in Rashomon are all different because what happens in them is different. Whereas, you know, Akira Kurosawa's directing style is he's just kind of like a whirlwind the entire movie. Like, you see the same scene 4 different times in Rashomon, and it's not like he's using dramatically different cinematic techniques to go over the same moment. It's more just like each moment is different. Whereas like with The Last Duel, the moments are all really similar, but it's just a slight change of perspective a lot of the time that makes the difference. So it's like you're seeing the exact same scene twice, and almost everything's the same except where like the characters may be standing in slightly different positions, and then what really makes all the difference is, you know, one scene is on a track, or one version of the story is on a track, and then the other version is handheld.
Right. Or
and
like
that like makes all the difference.
Yeah.
It's like it completely changes the dynamic of what you're watching. And I think there's a lot of little moments like that Ridley Scott does that are just they're so subtle and they're so perfect and they work so well. And it's like that's part of the reason I just want to say this movie is a shiny and chrome, even though I'm not in love with it. Because it's like because like shit like that I'm in love with that more than the movie itself.
Yeah. Well, so one, I think your comparison to Rashomon, because everyone's comparing it to Rashomon, and it's interesting because this is much more of a commercial American version of Rashomon.
Oh, absolutely.
You know? I would say that this is like, you know, controversial statement because I don't love Rashomon either. I think what everyone draws out of Rashomon is great. Like how a lot of people feel about Citizen Kane. A lot of people are like, Citizen Kane's not that great. And it's like, yeah, but we got all of these different techniques out of it. Rashomon, I feel like that. I'm like, I would rather take Seven Samurai or Sanjuro or Yojimbo or The Hidden Fortress. Like, I would take almost anything else but Rashomon. I have a copy of Rashomon I've watched once, and I'm just like, I'm good.
Why do you even have a copy of it,
though? Because it was like when I started buying Criterion movies, and I didn't realize I could buy them at Barnes & Noble, and I saw a copy of it, and I was like, oh, I hear that, you know, in my younger days, I hear that every film person needs to own a copy of Rashomon.
But you had already seen it before you bought it?
I had not seen it. No, I hadn't
well,
seen
then
it
that's
before
okay.
I bought
That's
it.
fine. That's different.
Yeah, but like...
I thought you had already seen it, and you're like, I don't like this movie, but I'm going to buy it anyway because I'm a self-hating like masochist or something.
No, although I would... Like, there was a time in my life I did that where I was like, I don't really like this movie, but it's, you know... But maybe if I watch it again, I'll like it, you know? Like,
Yeah, because like that's my whole philosophy of buying Criterion Blu-rays. It's like, I can't find this movie anywhere else, and it sounds cool. I want to see it. So, yeah.
Yeah, or like Criterion does a good enough job advertising it with like, this revolutionary neo-noir, blah, blah. And I'm like, ooh, I need to watch it now. And then I come up with something, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that was good. I'm glad I bought this.
Sometimes their, like, box art sells the movie really well, too. It's like, I don't know what Sleep with Anger is, but that, like, cover looks really cool.
Yeah, that's how I stumbled upon Tokyo Drifter. Like, the box art was awesome. And then, like, I reading about it, and it's like, yeah, this blah, blah, blah. And then I watched the trailer that they cut together, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. And it's like, yeah, it's pretty good. Pretty good, you know. Seijun Suzuki, he can direct. Who would have thought? Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. I still don't know how I stumbled upon Branded to Kill, but I'm glad I did because that's like one of the greatest movies I've ever seen.
That's like the definition of like people who like casual movies. If they watched Branded to Kill, they'd be like, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" But if you're into like movies as like an art. Or like stylistic movies, then it's like, okay, yeah, I get this. Because I stumbled into Branded to Kill, and I was just like, I was expecting something like Tokyo Drifter, and it just goes completely off the rails like halfway through, and I'm like,
oh yeah,
what the hell am I watching?
Branded to Kill is like 8.5 for crazy people. It's so good.
More watchable or less watchable than 8.5?
Oh, way more watchable.
That I agree, because I'm having such a hard time getting through 8.5. I don't know why, but like Branded to Kill, I was in for it. I was like, this is weird as all hell, but this is wildly awesome. Maybe because they're like laying around, like near the end of the movie, they're just like laying around on like on a wrestling ring, just like trying to recover strength so they can start fighting. Like, who does that? But anyway, we're talking about The Last Duel. Yeah, I agree that like Scott's tech. Actually, as I was watching it, I was wondering if Scott had kind of lost a step or two. I don't know why I thought that, but I kind of felt like initially I was like, I don't know, this isn't quite as good as like Ridley Scott in his prime. Maybe he's getting old. I was like, this is such a stupid thought for me to have.
I know, because he's been old since like 1979.
Since Alien, he's been an old fart.
He was wasn't he like 50 when he directed Alien?
God, was he? I don't know. I know he's 90 now.
Yeah.
Which it's like it's incredible he's still putting out. And we should talk about the idea of like the R-rated epic and how it's kind of gone away. But like
How every like interesting genre of movie has gone away.
yeah, he's 83 years old. He's 83. So yeah, it's kind of a shame, and that's one of the reasons why I'm glad we did this, is because it's been reported that it's like a box office bomb because no one's going out to see it, because no one wants to see either Matt Damon doesn't have any draw, people don't want to see Matt Damon in period pieces, people don't want to go out and see Ridley Scott movies, or what's probably most likely, people are scared of going out and taking a risk on a movie that is going to be kind of controversial for them or hard for them to process. Even if this is the easiest movie in, like, this is not a very complicated or hard to watch movie like some other movies.
It's eminently watchable, and it's also got like a lot. I mean, you know, Scott, for all of his brilliance, is a very commercial friendly director. I mean, it's like the movie's very watchable. It moves at a very tidy pace. It's like it's incredibly long, but it's not slow. It's like a soap opera too, where it's like it's not hyper violent and there's not tons of action sequences throughout. I mean, what little action there is pretty violent, but it's like I don't know. It's like a it's like a Netflix show, you know. It's like this. It's like a soap opera with all these different characters, and they all like kind of have these machinations against each other and stuff. And I don't know. I feel like that people would find that appealing. I think the bigger issue is that it's 2.5 hours. It's not available on streaming. People are kind of like, I mean, 2020 and early 2021 have kind of conditioned people, you know, like, movie theaters, what's so good about them anyway? And also it's like, I don't know. I think it just people don't want to go out and spend the money for something where they're like not sure if they're going to like it, or they're not sure if their kids are going to like it. I mean, not that you would take your kids to see The Last Duel unless you're... I would probably take my kids to see The Last Duel, but that's me.
You don't want to take your kids to see The Last Duel, a movie that spends a good amount of its runtime trying to figure out the economics of living society prior to the Crusades.
I know. It's like...
That was my favorite part, by the way.
What's hilarious is, like, you know, you wouldn't take your... I mean, there's the content part of it, but it's like... More so than the content part of it, The Last Duel is not for kids because they wouldn't understand what the fuck is going on.
Yeah.
They'd be like, wait, because, like, especially if you show the same story 3 times from 3 different perspectives, they'll be like, wait, didn't we already see this? And it's like, well, no, yeah, but it's from, like, this other person's perspective. And they're like, what's a perspective? I don't know what that is because I'm 7.
What do you mean first-person perspective?
And they're like, well, you see, like, at that time, you know, society was kind of like this, and, like, they had these certain unwritten rules about, like, how you're supposed to talk to people. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's like...
But why doesn't he just Google it? No, because...
Like, that was an epiphany I had a long time ago, where, like, R-rated movies are not for kids, not necessarily because they're violent or full of, like, sexual content or swearing or anything like that. It's because they're about, like, adult life, and kids don't understand what adult life is.
Yeah, and even, like, this movie kind of, it's, again, I'm probably going to draw a lot of parallels to Kingdom of Heaven, because, like, one of my favorite scenes in Kingdom of Heaven is literally just Balian trying to make his land better. I thought that was like, oh yeah, no one would do that in a movie. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. And in this, when they're going around and explaining how, like, the economics of the society work, like, hey, yeah, you own an estate. You need to collect rent. You haven't been collecting rent. As they say in Goodfellas, fuck you, pay me.
I know. Well, it's funny because it's a part of medieval society that everyone kind of overlooks, is the economics of serfdom.
Yes.
And it's like, you know, you read up on medieval history, and economic beef over, you know, whatever is a big driving force in a lot of calamities that have happened. A lot of, like, wars and conflicts and, like, political intrigue was caused by, like, you know, oh, there was a plague that wiped out half my workforce. I can't pay my rents on time as, like, the lord of a certain county or whatever, and all this shit. And that kind of gets overlooked, but it's like, you read why did such and such war happen? And it was it's this really complicated, boring thing about economics, and how everyone pays rent to someone, and then someone doesn't pay their rents on time, and then they get shaken down, and then they get pissed about it, and then another country invades, and then there's all this crap, and the 100 Years' War is that, but 1,000 times more complicated. And this movie takes place during the 100 Years' War.
Okay.
And yeah, so it's they did a really good job of giving you at least a taste of how medieval society was run on a socioeconomic level, which is important to the story because ultimately the story is about social issues. So it makes sense that they have to be well, you see, at this time, this is how the economy worked, and here's who owed who money, and here's kind of these complex systems of swearing loyalty to people that can produce conflicts of interest and parallel loyalties to groups that may be at odds with each other, and all this stuff. And they handle it in a really one thing I will praise the script for is they handle that in a very clear, concise way where it doesn't feel like an exposition dump. It's always cleverly woven into whatever is already going on.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the economics part of it is like I said, the best stuff is, understanding why Legree is conflicted based off of his. Okay, so I love the character dynamics in this movie as well.
Yes.
I alluded to earlier, and we'll also talk about the social
I guess
construct of the movie as well.
Should we talk about the premise of the movie just in case? Because apparently no one's going to see this.
Yeah,
You should probably explain what the movie's about.
It's about what happens when one other person damages someone else's property.
Basically, it's about vandalism.
So bad. It's so terrible. God.
So it's about 2 knights, Jean de Carouge and Jacques
they're not
Legree.
both knights.
Well, I think in real life, Jacques Legree eventually became a knight, but he's just a squire in the movie.
Okay.
A knight,
There we go.
Jean de Carouge, and a squire, Jacques Legree, who have known each other for a very long time and kind of have a frenemy relationship with each other for various complicated reasons. Jean de Carouge's wife accuses Jacques Legree of raping her, and it eventually goes to a duel to the death between Jacques Legree and Jean de Carouge to determine the guilt. It's a trial by combat. And while it was not the last duel ever sanctioned by the French government, it was one of the last ones, and it was the last kind of famous one because the publicity around it was so huge, and it was such a huge I don't know. It was you brought up Stillwater. It's kind of like the whole Amanda Knox thing. It was just everyone was talking about it when it was happening. It was this huge trial. Everyone was taking different sides, who's innocent, who's guilty, what's gonna happen. It just generated all this excitement. It was it's
It was the TikTok challenge of the week.
It's like Mayweather McGregor to the death to determine who committed a murder or something.
Yeah.
It's imagine the biggest 1v1 combat sports event ever that is also wrapped in a controversial true crime case. And that's how big it was at that time.
I also want to note it does seem like I'm downplaying the aspect of rape when I say property this or property that, but that also is significant to the story in the sense of the way that they viewed their women, the way that they viewed wives was more like property. And
well, there's a reason I called it feminist Rashomon because it's
right.
Ultimately, while it starts off being about Jean de Carouge and Jacques Legree and their rivalry and how it sort of boils over into this true crime, fight to the death extravaganza, it's what the movie is really about is about, kind of systemic mistreatment of women. How like an entire society in the just kind of in the subtle ways that it's structured, in ways that people just sort of take for granted, can be geared a certain way that puts people or a certain group of people at a disadvantage.
Well, at least
and in this case, a very extreme disadvantage.
Yeah,
which we'll get into later, I think.
Well, I'll say also that like it would be easy to say like the whole movie is about this, but really the last third of the movie is about that. Like each perspective takes a different outlook on it. Yeah,
that's what I mean. Is it's like a Trojan horse in a way, where it's like you don't think it's going to be about feminism until it very clearly is about feminism.
Yeah.
Because it's like at first it's about the two men and their characters and their dynamics with the people around them.
Mm-hmm.
And then but what it's really doing is it's planting the seeds that then get recontextualized later when you get Marguerite, Jean de Carouge's wife's side of the story. And so, one of the things that I found a little irritating is like the movie's split into 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is the truth according to Jean de Carouge. Chapter 2 is the truth according to Jacques Legris. And chapter 3 is the truth according to Marguerite de Carouge. But when they show the chapter 3 heading, it says the truth according to Marguerite de Carouge, and then all the other words disappear for a moment, and it just says the truth, which is like, I think you're doing yourself a little bit of a disservice by doing that, because you're putting a very clear ideological stamp on the movie by saying like the woman's perspective is the truth, and that's it, like end of story, which works from a messaging perspective because it recontextualizes prior events that you've seen in this, portraying this as like the objective view of things. But I don't know, it comes off a little phony or a little heavy-handed.
Heavy-handed, I think, is the... I'll also say this, like, I kind of want to get... Go ahead.
I guess to compare it to Rashomon never takes a side. It gives you 4 different perspectives of the same event. They're all irreconcilably different, and it gives you no indication which one is quote-unquote the right one.
I mean,
and
arguably
to an extent,
until the end. But yeah.
Well, I don't know, because I think the whole thing with Rashomon is it is about not knowing, in a sense. Like, it's about what do you do when you can't know the truth, which is a great like question to ask in a movie. It's like that's like the whole theme of Zodiac. It's like what do you know when you can't, like, you have the question that you've dedicated everything to finding the answer, but there is no answer. So what do you do with your life now?
Is that why you like Zodiac so much?
That's why I like Zodiac so much.
Actually, I like Zodiac a lot. Not as much as you, but the one scene that I love is when Jake Gyllenhaal is like near the end of the movie when he goes into that person's house, and like as he's giving details about the Zodiac killer, he's noticing more and more that the house that he's in is very
like
similar to the
like close
Zodiac
to what he's
killer.
saying. Yeah.
And like the tension just builds and builds and builds. And like I remember I was on the edge of my seat the entire time I was watching that scene. I was like, this is why everyone loves David Fincher.
I know.
Like, this scene is perfect.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I want to kind of get out of the way, because like you and I, we're not interested in talking about like the Me Too movement and like this sort of like we don't really talk about feminism because obviously we're like 2 guys who like to talk about very masculine movies. The one thing I'll say about The Last Duel is a lot of people have been like, oh, this movie is like the capstone of like the Me Too movement. This is a very important work. And like I try to look at movies out of the context of the immediate now and see how they would stack up. And I feel like this is a movie that, like, even if it were made 10 years ago, people would still feel like it was relevant. Even if it were made 20 years ago, people would still feel like it was relevant.
Oh, yeah,
so I think
so.
I think the idea of like placing this as like Matt Damon and Ben Affleck brought in Nicole, what's her? I can never say her name properly.
Nicole Holofcener.
Yes. Nicole Holofcener, just because they were like, oh, we need to make sure we have the female perspective. I'm like, I'm glad they did, because it fleshes out the last third of the movie. But I don't think, and it might be a result of everything that's going on in Hollywood, but I think that even if it were released back in the 70s, people would still look at it as like, oh yeah, this is, the way that they tell it, they do their best job to be somewhat objective in each of the stories, but give just enough room. Again, the Hollywood thing, like, you could tell even in the Adam Driver story that it's like, it's kind of rapey. And that's like the most generous read of the situation. So I just wanted to put that out there, because I don't really want to dwell too much on that side of it, because I feel like a lot of people are.
Yeah, I think this movie would be considered exactly how it's considered now, regardless of when it was made. Mm-hmm. If it was made in the 1960s or 70s, you would just have like YouTubers talking about how ahead of its time it was.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, it's a trait of critics that I don't particularly like, where they really try to put whatever the movie is in the context of the contemporary moment, when sometimes the movie actually makes more sense if you divorce it from any context. Like, I remember there was a line from Richard Brody of The New Yorker when he was talking about Good Time, and he said it was like he called it like a manic crime caper in the age of Trump. And it's like, what does Trump being president have to do with this movie, man? Like, that line makes no fucking sense. You're just trying to like jam this into the context of the present moment, and it's like that's absolutely ludicrous.
The funniest thing is we're going to look back on this movie in 20 years and be like, man, nothing really has changed, has it? Like, I was thinking about Do the Right Thing, right? Because it was like right after a huge event. It wasn't was it Rodney King?
I think so.
Yeah, and everyone was like, oh, this is such a movie of the moment. And it's like, I'm pretty sure you can watch Do the Right Thing now and it still feels pretty culturally relevant. Like, there are some movies that just transcend it,
Well, yeah. I mean, this movie is about the fucking 1300s, so it's pretty timeless in that sense.
This movie's about the 1300s. Man, it's so good that things aren't like that now.
I know.
Sure.
Well, it's like they're I mean, things are better for sure, but they're still
a
like
lot
that
better,
in kind of a subtle way.
The fact that we can still draw a lot of parallels is the disturbing part.
I know.
But again, it would still be disturbing if this were released in the 70s. People would be like, man, isn't that disturbing how people are treated like second-class citizens? Like, yeah, I wonder what that's about.
Yeah,
anyway.
Well, it's like, because I mean, a lot of so later in the movie, there's like a court scene where they're trying to determine.
Oh yeah.
They're trying to determine whether the duel, like, Matt Damon wants to have this duel to the death, and it's they're trying to determine whether that's warranted or not, like whether there's enough, like, basically Parliament has to try the case and be so unsure that, like, well, I guess we need to have this duel to decide, we can't decide who's innocent or guilty, so we'll have God decide.
Just like in Kingdom of Heaven, I say he's innocent. We'll fight. God will decide the victor.
Yeah. But it's like the level of intense scrutiny and intimidation that they put towards Marguerite is like ridiculous. Like they try to break her on the while she's giving her testimony so that it doesn't have to go to the duel.
Yep.
And it's like, they're like threatening her and stuff. They're saying like, look, if your husband dies in this duel, if he loses, you're going to get burned at the stake. You're going to suffer like all these incredibly excruciating, horrible punishments. Like, I mean, they really put the screws into her, and it's like, Jesus Christ. But like, that still happens. Like, lawyers to this day try to bully people into dropping accusations or into shutting up or into looking stupid in front of the court so that the jury sees them as untrustworthy, even though they're probably telling the truth. So it's I mean, that stuff's still relevant to this day. And it's interesting they didn't show any testimony from Matt Damon or Adam Driver, because I think in the real life version of it, like, I mean, they both had to be grilled as well, and gave plenty of testimony.
I'm sure. I'm actually wondering if they're going to come out with like a Ridley Scott director's cut of this, where it's like an hour and a half longer.
Oh, I hope.
But it has
not.
all of that stuff.
It's not like that's definitely not necessary.
I hope they don't come out with a director's cut. But if they did, I would be interested in watching it, just because most of Ridley Scott's like preferred cuts, somehow he doesn't have final cut. I don't get it. That's like the only assumption I can think of.
Yeah,
as most of his preferred cuts are significantly better. Well,
that's the thing. He's always like 10 steps ahead of the producers in terms of like how to actually make a movie.
Mm-hmm. Even when he's a producer, like he was the producer on Kingdom of Heaven. I think he was a producer.
He's 10 steps ahead of himself.
I know, and then he's like, "Oh well, I had to cut it for the studio." Like, bitch. You're Ridley Scott. You made Gladiator, goddammit. You made Blade Runner. You made freaking Alien. Like,
sometimes I am so clever, I outsmart even myself. Yeah, he's like, that makes no sense. He's like, he's a producer on Blade Runner, or sorry, on Kingdom of Heaven, and he's like, yeah, well, you know, the producers screwed up the movie, so I had to go back and fix it. It's like, dude, you were a producer.
You were the producer. You fucked it up. I think
but he was right. The producers did screw up the movie, so he had to go back and fix it.
Fucking re-edit it, yeah. But that's another problem of like, well, you can't get away with a 4-hour epic anymore. Like they can't put that in theaters. And he's like, as a producer, I know that I can't. But then there's the director side of me that it's like, yeah, okay. But God, Ridley Scott, he's such a weird, like, he's following up The Last Duel with House of Gucci. Like, what the fuck, Ridley Scott? God damn it.
Well, it's like how he do Alien Covenant and All the Money in the World the same year.
Yeah, like for some reason he keeps being drawn to these contemporary pieces, which to me are his weakest stuff. Like all like American Gangster, I don't love. Black Rain is like a guilty pleasure. Like
American Gangster is my guilty pleasure. I like that movie.
Really?
Yeah.
Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe.
I know. Well, it's those two are like such a good combo on screen.
A good year.
Fuck. A good year. Fuck.
Yeah. But I got derailed, so I'm gonna bring it back to. Let me bring it back to some notes I had here. All right. Yeah, I already said the thing about Adam Driver being... Oh, you know what? I do want to talk about the way the characters were drawn, because I was a big fan of it. Mm-hmm. And like, I like the idea of, like, we have this... I said it at the beginning. We have this this idea of, like, the perfect knight. You know, he's always noble. He's always honorable. He's always above everything. And, like, I think getting stoic Matt Damon... is Matt Damon stoic? But getting Matt Damon in that role where he's like, I'm going to present everything that people find endearing about it, but also we're going to like completely shit on this character archetype throughout the entire movie and show how even at that time he was almost irrelevant. Like the only thing that he was good at was fighting. You know, everything else he failed at, but he was good at fighting and he fought dirty, but then he was like seen, but you know, he was seen as like honorable. But even then, no one gave him any respect. It's like an interesting way of like the passing time of it's like bringing it back to Metal Gear Solid like we did in the last episode. You know, Big Boss, he's like, the soldier is becoming obsolete. What is it like to be a person who fights in a world that no longer honors fighting, or where like fighting is no longer a relevant thing? And this movie is kind of the last vestiges of that. So even though like what's his character's name? I need a list. Jean de Carrouge, Sir John was like kind of like, you look at him and he's kind of an asshole. Like he's probably my favorite character just because I love that archetype. Like I love the sort of defeated but still trying to hang on to it, and like he just gets no respect the entire time, even when he's being or no perceived respect. I should say.
Well, it's why he's constantly going to war. Like he you know, later after the movie's over, he dies in the Crusades, but it's like even after he's like a celebrity and stuff from this whole thing and he's wealthy, he still has to like keep fighting because it's all he knows, it's all he's good at.
Yeah,
he's like, it's just war, which you contrast that with Jacques Legris, who's he's a smart guy. He likes partying and womanizing. He's like, I don't really need to fight. I'll just try.
He can read.
I can read. I'll just try and get rich. Fuck that.
Well, yeah, it's like his path. It's like, well, I could constantly go to war with Jean de Carouge and get fucked eventually, or I can start collecting money and live a much more comfortable, fancy life. And I like the fact that those two characters are friends and they contrast so well against each other as like the splitting narrative. Like, I think that's great. Mm-hmm. And like Adam Driver, of course, is really good. Also, Adam Driver is really good because I feel like Jacques Legris is really hard to play, right? Because it's like you have to be charming enough to win the audience. You have to establish that the protestations are just formal at best. You have to understand how he can read the situation as, I can take what I want, but also still be somewhat sympathetic to him. And I think and then you have to like do literally like 2 rape scenes as like the aggressor, which I feel like is just a very difficult thing to play. Obviously, I think that Jodie Comer has a harder, like she's got the most difficult of all in those scenes. But it can't be easy being the one to put it upon. And like Ridley Scott does not pull back that camera. He does not pull it away. He tries not to go away either.
Both actors, like all the actors, do a great job.
They're all all of the actors in this movie are really good.
I mean, Matt Damon is still kind of Matt Damon, but he's less Matt Damon in this than he has been in a lot of movies recently. Mm-hmm. Where it's like, he plays this very, like you said, just kind of rough, brutish character really well. Who just thinks he thinks of the world basically in soldiers' terms. He's like, fight. He's like, I gotta fight all the time. I gotta win. I gotta survive.
And I need to make sure I have an offspring to inherit.
Yeah, and like I need to have a son because again, this is about survival. Mm-hmm. I need to survive. My name needs to survive, and so on and so on. Adam Driver. Yeah, he has this really weird dance where he's basically a rapist, but he has to make you like him for everything leading up to, and at least in one scenario after, he does something really horrible. And then, Jodie Comer does a great job as well. I think, what's interesting is her character doesn't change much in the different stories. Like, she doesn't have to play 2 different versions of the same person. Mm-hmm. It's just you're getting more information about her each time, and then you get the most at the end.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that's significant too, is like they sort of decentralize or deprioritize her a lot in the first 2 stories. Like, that's,
which we can get effect. Back to later because it's also that serves an interesting narrative function. Mm-hmm. And then all the side characters are really good. Like Ben Affleck is just super hateable.
I love him in this. He's so good. He's probably
he does a really
actor.
Good job, but he's super hateable. I'm glad like Martin Kasakis is in there just randomly. I'm glad he's still in stuff because he's always good fun.
He is. I was like, that's the third like strand connecting this to Kingdom of Heaven. I was like, hey, he's back. He's still acting and stuff. I think it was just like Ridley Scott was like, hey, Martin, would you like to be in my movie? He's like, yeah, it's Ridley Scott. It'll only take up like a week of my life. Mm-hmm. And he's a good guy. He's not like a bad guy.
He's a good guy, yeah. He's like a sympathetic character now.
Yeah, finally.
Also, what's hilarious is I was just thinking of like wildly different portrayals of the same historical figure. So the King of France, Charles VI, is portrayed as like this weird weaselly child in this movie. So you remember The King with Timothée Chalamet?
Yeah.
So the King of France in that movie is also King Charles VI, obviously much older.
Who plays him in that?
I don't know, but it's like completely different. He's a completely different person in that movie than he is in this movie, and I just thought that was hilarious. Because Charles VI was King of France for like the entire latter portion of the 100 Years' War, and I think he eventually won the 100 Years' War for France. Because the whole thing is they lost. So France initially lost the 100 Years' War because Edward the Fifth, or no, sorry, Henry V, basically made himself or his son king of France. But then he died before his wife could have an heir. So Charles VI, who was still alive somehow, I mean, he was absolutely ancient at the time, was like, oh shit, I'm going to restart the 100 Years' War and win. And he did.
So what you're saying is Charles VI, really interesting character. Surprisingly, has there ever been a movie made about him?
I don't think so. He's just like a background character in all this other stuff. Like he's a background character in all the Henry V plays and things.
He's the Limey of history.
He's like, yeah. I mean, he's I don't know what you'd call him. He's like the Max Holloway of history. Like in the fifth round, he's still there, but everyone else is like just dead or tired. So he wins.
Well, like, because there hasn't been anything like really made about him, but he's always appearing in everything. For all of you young generation, all you Zoomers out there, he's basically the Nick Fury of history. He just keeps popping up as side characters in all of these things. He's very important, and if you removed him, it would be very bad.
Yeah, well, it's just like
but they don't want to stand to make something of him.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know. He won the 100 Years' War simply by living
Outlasting
longer than everyone else. Yeah.
Charles VI. That's great. Like I found the actor who played as him like incessantly annoying, but I guess that's the point.
I think that was the point. Yeah.
But ain't got no respect. Oh, also, let's just talk quickly about accents and the fact that like none of the actors even bothered to put one on, and how I appreciate that quite a lot.
I enjoyed that. Like, it's a mix of American, English, and French accents throughout the whole movie, and no one cares, and it's all cool.
I think if whatever normal accent you talk in, they're just like, yeah, just talk in that. It's like, you know what? That's good, because
that implies Adam Driver naturally has a slightly British twang to his accent.
Adam Driver. That's why he's in House of Gucci, because Ridley Scott's like, you're the only one that gave a damn on the accents. Now he has a really bad Italian accent in it. I don't know. I thought he was he sounded a lot like Kylo Ren, and that was, the charges brought against me are ludicrous. Like, okay, he's not dropping his, he's not like doing the King's English. So
well, but he's like, he's slipping in and out of it, like Charlie Hunnam. He basically has Charlie Hunnam's accent in this movie, which works somehow, because again, like, no one cares about accents, and it's kind of great.
Yeah, and we're so conditioned for like, oh, they even said this in interviews, like, oh yeah, anytime anyone thinks old, they just think British accents. Like, finally, someone is actually standing up to the real tribulations of narrative filmmaking, getting proper accents. They're all French. They should be speaking French. If not speaking French, who cares about their accent?
Yep.
God, this isn't a James Bond movie where if they talk in a Russian accent, they're speaking Russian. Like, no. They don't care. They all speak common. It's fine. So I also really appreciated that. Also, just watching Matt Damon in period pieces, he has like an aversion to doing a British accent, I think.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've ever heard him do one. He always, like, in the Great Wall, he has this really weird like Norse accent or something. I don't know. Matt Damon's a weird guy. Apparently he can't grow out facial hair. So his facial hair looked fake and weird because it was fake and weird. So there you go. Ridley Scott does not care about makeup like Peter Jackson does. And it's fine. It's fine. Should we talk a little bit about Jodie Comer?
Sure.
All right. So you were saying how, like, narratively, it was really interesting how... Okay, well, first off, I want to say the biggest thing that I was kind of annoyed at on the previews was, the way that they made it look. It was like, oh, she's married to Matt Damon. And I thought, oh, no, here's another Hollywood age thing where it's like, she's 26, he's like 50-something. But we're just going to pretend like they're close in age. Nope. The movie's like, nah, it's his second wife. He grabbed her because she was pretty and young, and he needed to sire an heir. And so I was like, okay, that makes it a little bit. And of course, like, all of the sex scenes between them are like just really, really uncomfortable and awkward. And so, like, I did appreciate the fact that, like, they addressed the huge age gap, and it was significant to the narrative.
Yeah, well, because like I said, the whole movie is about how medieval society, which could be extrapolated to really any time in history, is like set up in a way that women are just treated horribly, which could also be like expanded to any minority group or any group that doesn't have power. So yeah, it's like a lot of the way the movie frames things really effectively gets that into your head without explicitly telling you. So a big part of that is how the first 2/3 of the movie are all about Jean de Carouge and Jacques Legree's rivalry. How, Marguerite is just kind of in the background for a lot of it. And she also doesn't really change in any of those scenes. She's the one constant in a weird way, where everyone else changes. And then at the end, she has a great conversation with Matt Damon where she says, it's like, why did you want this to go to a duel to the death? Like, you should have told me that, like, I could die too, if you lose. Because, like, I wouldn't have taken that risk. I would have just, like, sucked it up and dealt with and just lived with this instead of trying to pursue justice if that was the case. And, Matt Damon's like, well, it's about the truth and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, no, it's not about the truth. It's about you hate this guy so much that you want to kill him anyway, and I gave you an excuse. And he just has, like, no answer for that because she's 100% correct. And it's true because, like, the movie does a really good job of setting that up where it's like the whole first 2/3 is about their rivalry and the last third is about feminism. And in the feminism section, Matt Damon's like, this is about the truth and justice and stuff. And she's like, oh, did you forget the first 2/3 of this movie? This was just about you two guys hating each other. Like, you just want to kill him. And, it doesn't even matter what he did to me. You're just like, oh, sweet. Now I can kill him, like, in a way that's legal.
Yeah. Yeah,
again, it's like it's another way that, like, women just are treated like crap. Where it's like, it's not even about the fact that this horrible crime was committed against her. It's just Matt Damon's like, sweet, I can kill Adam Driver now.
Yeah, it's like, oh, here's my actual legal recourse, and I'm gonna go all the way to the top, and it's gonna be me and God and this guy, and it's like, yeah, but at any one time, did you care about how this would affect me? Like when he's just like, spread the rumors, tell everyone about how my wife was viciously raped by this guy. Like, really? What about, like, the feeling of he doesn't care about her at all? Oh, I see.
And he's like, I have a plan. And then and then at the end, like, she has a child now, which they've wanted for so long. And she's got the kid, and she's like, a child needs his mother more than his mother needs to be right. And Matt Damon just has, like, the most dead behind the eyes look. He's just like, that completely went in one ear and out the other.
Can you say it again in French, please? I didn't quite understand. Well, the other one is, like, after telling her husband that she's been raped, he's like, well, that's, after almost choking her out, he just, like, walks over to the bed, takes off his pants, and he's like, well, let's fuck. Like, what? Like, really? Like, you don't want to, like, that was the moment that it was just like, Jesus Christ, all of these people are horrible.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, because he needs to, like, reassert ownership of her,
yeah,
basically.
It just, like, her whole storyline, I felt, was, like, a lot of fun to watch just because, like, it's that kind of I guess it's kind of a cliche of, like, the husband who's incompetent at doing things, like an old comedy sketch. Husband is not incompetent at running his land, but if you hand it over to his wife will, like, bring, she'll do all of the things that he wasn't doing and, make the books balance properly. And it's like, I don't know how much of that is true, but I still greatly enjoyed watching it, even though it is a kind of a tired cliche at this point.
Oh, yeah. I mean, their dynamic is very, like, Married with Children, Al Bundy sort of thing, which is like, yeah, it's... I mean, it sucks, but I guess that's the way it was.
Yeah.
I think the
Well,
other
and
thing that's
again,
interesting is like how when she, so like, you know, she gets raped and she's like, this is really awful. Something has to be done. And, you know, society's like, well, rape is a crime against the husband's property. It's like vandalism, basically. And I'm like, Jesus, that's fucked up.
Yeah.
And then, you know, she tells her husband this, and he's like about to kill her. I'm like, Jesus, that's fucked up.
Yeah.
And then he's like, here, like, you know, bend over. Like, I need to do you so that, like, I can reestablish ownership of you. I'm like, Jesus, that's fucked up. And then, and then as soon as she, like, kind of starts telling people about this, like, that this happened, it's, all the men are like, you know, this is pretty serious. We should, like, you know, if this is true, we should pursue this in the courts. And I'm like, okay. And then all the women are like, just hate her. Like, the mom hates her, and her best friend turns on her. And I'm like, that might be one, like, there's the witness intimidation part that's, like, creepily accurate to modern times. And then there's that. It's like, as bad as women's situation is in the world at any time, really, there's nothing that women hate more than other women. And it shows. it's like, oh, like, you know,
Yeah.
like, she does not have a single female ally in the entire movie, and it, like, oh, that's bad. Like, that is tremendously fucked up.
Yeah. Well, and
then
worst
even
is
like at the end when the mom is like, oh yeah, like, women get raped all the time. Like, what do you think happened to me all these years? I've been, you know, taken against my will by like hundreds of dudes. I just, you know, I just pull my pants up and keep going. And like, you should too. And it's like, what the fuck, dude? Like, seriously?
Well, like, I think probably like the most controversial part is when she's with her kid and she's like, if I had known how much love I would have for this little parasite that I'm holding, like, I probably would have just sucked it up and not said anything if I had known what the cost would be. And it's like, fuck,
well,
man.
It's like, you know that you're in a fucked up society when you hear the mom say, like, it's like, I've been raped plenty of times and I didn't do anything about it because there's bigger things to worry about. And like, man, that's a tremendously fucked up thing to say.
Yeah.
And do. And it's reflective of how tremendously fucked up the world is. And then
And still is.
later, and still is. And then later, Marguerite, you know, finally has her son, and she's like, you know what? I kind of agree with the mom. Like, there are bigger things to worry about. I have this kid now. Like, I don't want to leave this kid, you know, motherless. And I'm like, fuck, dude. Like,
Not only that,
the movie really drives a lot of those points home in a really effective way that's not it's a little bash you over the head at some parts, but for the most part it isn't. It's just like character dynamics, which is really well done. And I guess that is also a testament to the script. Like, as obvious and over the top some parts of it are, it does, for the most part, I think, drive home its message really well in a way that's not like rubbing your nose and everything.
yeah, I feel like it gets a little bit soapboxy, but it's effective. Like, it's not
Well, it's
not
like, for
too
every
over
moment
the
that is
top.
soapboxy, it, like, that kind of like is a knock against it. It does, I think. Actually, not for every moment that's soapboxy,
I mean,
but for some of the
yeah.
moments that are soapboxy, it does redeem it. Like, the conversation with the mom in the church, where the mom is like, I've been raped plenty of times, you know, I have bigger things to worry about. Like, that comes off as really soapboxy, that whole discussion.
See that? Yeah,
But
I felt like the one with when she's talking to Matt Damon, but it's also narratively very significant. But anyway, go on.
I was going to say, yeah, I actually feel the opposite, where it's like, I felt that moment was very soapboxy, and it kind of pulled me out of the movie for a sec. But then later, you know, when she has the kid and is talking to Matt Damon and sort of calls, it's like a subtle callback to that conversation. It never gets mentioned explicitly, but she just talks about how her priorities have changed now that she has a son. Like I thought that was really well done and almost like redeems that earlier soapboxy moment because it continues that conversation in a more nuanced way.
Like that's again, it's really hard because I feel like this movie should be a shiny and chrome, and I can't point to what is off on it because I don't hate this. I think the script is really good because I like how each part of the movie, and this is more probably a testament to Ridley Scott, but each part of the movie feels distinct. Like the point of view of each character is distinct. Matt Damon's section is very, it's like it's like a guy just rolling everything over. It's so direct when everything that's happening, even to the point like cutting between scenes just feels really awkward because it's just going forward. There's just a lot of forward momentum in that story. And then in Adam Driver's scenes, it's like very talky and there's a lot of dialogue and it's emphasizing the things that he finds significant in life. And then in the Jodie Comer stuff, it talks a lot about like there's a lot of like the nuanced discussion, but also sort of what her life was, which was like everyday life of running the estate, but also how they would go about shopping and living the life like that. And, so there's a lot of stuff that I just really like in the movie. Mm-hmm. Even at the scripting stage, like the fact that they are able to kind of portray each character, like Le Carrouge's story, he's like, kind of like this upward, this stalwart kind of guy who's like, honor is most important. The truth will win out. And then you look at it on the other side and they're like, this guy's such an idiot. He's such a pig-headed idiot. And it's so easy to see all of these scenes where he clearly is an idiot.
He's a meathead that's like 90% meat, 10% head.
And then the scene where like in Jodie Comer's storyline, Marguerite's storyline, when Adam Driver breaks in and he's like, I love you and you love me, clearly. This is very obvious. And you're like, yeah, we've gone like this whole section of her story where they haven't interacted at all. So this is coming out of left field when he's like, you clearly love me and I love you. We love each other. Can't you tell? I can sense the spark. And it's like, they do a really good job of making it seem like she hasn't been thinking about him for like weeks or months at a time, or even at all. And then all of a sudden he comes in and declares his love and she's like very thrown off. Like all of that stuff I think works really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think a big part of it works well because of Ridley Scott. I think
he definitely pulls everything together.
Yeah, like the script is good. I think it's just I'm trying to figure out like why the movie, I don't love the movie as much as like I'm rating it. And I'm thinking it's the script just because I think there were just aspects of the story that weren't as like super captivating and also just like the way the story was structured and the length and stuff like that were like good, but not crazy about. Whereas like everything else I am crazy about. Like I love the performances. Yeah. I love Ridley Scott's direction. I love the technical execution of everything. I mean, it's like the movie's got the Ridley Scott look. Where all the lighting is like really, I don't know how to describe it.
Well, he really pushes, like, it is a very distinct blue. The Ridley Scott blue is very distinct.
Yeah, like, well, not only that, but it's like the lighting in the movie has so much depth and range that everything looks incredibly dramatic. Whereas, like, you compare it to a Marvel movie and everything's kind of just flat and plain looking. Like you can see everything, but there's no like art to it almost.
Right. Well, the fact that when they're inside, everything looks like it's lit from only the fireplace and the candles, for example. Yeah. Like the commitment to the world building, but also it takes the quote limitations of the time unquote to create a stylized appearance. They use a lot of they use a lot of low dynamic range in it. Yeah. Where it's not just like black and white highlights. It's like there's a lot of gradient inside the muted. Like the color palette is kind of muted, but there's a lot of nuance in the gray areas of the image.
Yeah. Well, it's like I think Ridley Scott has perfected this epic movie look over the last, I guess, maybe 10 years or so. where I think a lot of movies, at least big blockbusters, have
20. I would say
transitioned-
20. I would say 20 years. But yeah, go ahead.
Kind of. I mean, I think his movies look the way they do now, starting more recently, like post Kingdom of Heaven. Because Kingdom of Heaven and like Gladiator and movies like that, I think look very different from how they look now.
Okay.
They still have a very epic quality to them, but it's a different. Their visuals are a lot less stylized. But I think he's perfected like this very stylized, quote unquote, epic movie look where, again, in contrast to a lot of blockbusters where the look is very just sort of plain, and it's more to just make sure you can see everything, and it's meant to kind of, I think a lot of blockbusters are meant to look, quote unquote, realistic. Like they want it to look like a documentary or like everyday life, so that your brain doesn't question the outlandish like action that's happening as much. Whereas Scott goes the other way. Like every scene is lit and shot with more drama than is realistically possible. Because like the lighting has so many levels of gradation to it, where the highlights are really bright, the shadows are really dark, and there's all this tonality in between. That where you just look at like a still image from any scene in one of his movies and you're just like, whoa. And I mean, he also moves the camera really well. He edits really well. He picks his spots in a very smart and considered way.
Yeah.
Where he cuts and so on.
Yeah.
But it's like all of that lends it this quality of like you're watching like a series of paintings where it's like he's trying to squeeze every ounce of like emotional tension out of every frame. And I think that it's really a style that he's been working on more for the last 10 years than the last 20, and that he's kind of, I think, perfected now, because I used to call it the shiny look because the highlights are so powerful in a lot of his more recent movies.
Yeah.
But the shiny look. He's perfected the shiny look from, I think The Martian was the movie where I first really noticed it. Mm-hmm. But it's like that movie and every movie since, and I'm trying to think if anything before also kind of looked that way. But
so I think
The Martian was where I first really noticed this, and then it's just sort of been amplified ever since.
I think part of it is just because he switched over to digital cameras, and so now he has a lot more control over the grade of the film.
Yeah,
which
that might be it.
To me, like some of it, like the Ridley Scott blue, to me is kind of like, I'm gonna say it's like a lazy grade, where it's like it almost looks like he put just a blue filter or like a slightly cyan filter over like the entire thing, but then he also bumps up the contrast, so like you get those really, you get really distinct lines, like outlines, but also in the grade itself you get a lot of high contrast.
Okay,
but
I first noticed it in Prometheus, actually. I thought The Martian was before Prometheus, but it was Prometheus.
Prometheus would have been first.
Like,
although
I think Robin Hood, he first starts like experimenting with it a little bit, but it's not quite there. Prometheus, it's there. Like that's the look of the movie, and then I think like Exodus, Gods and Kings, The Martian, Alien Covenant.
Oh yeah,
and so
Exodus,
on.
Gods and Kings.
Yeah, they all have, for lack of a better phrase, the shiny look. Like it's this ultra dramatic, super painterly lighting.
I think a lot of it has to do with digital cameras, and especially how far they've come, because now he does all of his coloring digitally. The other thing is, like, every time I watch a Ridley Scott movie, I try to figure out where he placed all of his cameras, because he puts in like 6 or 7 cameras anytime he shoots a scene, so that cameras can still move and create dynamic shots, but also each camera is framed so that he only has to do 2 or 3 takes, cut it, bring it into the editing program, and then slice it all together, which is another thing about like the Ridley Scott style. It's similar with Tony Scott. Tony Scott would shoot with a lot of cameras, but that's why like every time I see a dramatic moving camera in a Ridley Scott movie, I'm like, okay, he obviously really wanted to plan it. Otherwise, everything he's shooting is from multiple camera angles.
That's insane, because it's so hard to light.
I know.
Multiple shots as opposed to just one.
I know. That's why he's crazy. Like, he's like, oh yeah, I perfected that when I was directing commercials. And I just like more cameras, because if I have more cameras, then actors have to do less takes.
Yeah.
And like we've talked about, like for actors, their best takes are either really early or they're like after 50 or 60 times doing the same scene. They'll uncover something new. So he likes doing that. And I mean, it shows. I forgot that Matt Damon had been in The Martian with Ridley Scott, because I was like, I feel like these guys work together. Like, this is the only movie these guys will all work together, because very rarely does Ridley Scott have actors who come back over and over and over again, like unlike Spielberg and Scorsese and things like that. But Damon's been in multiple movies. Martin Kosak's has been in multiple movies.
I was gonna say Ridley Scott's he's always got Russell Crowe.
Russell Crowe's always in those movies. Yeah, like he's got a handful of people who come back over and over. What's his name? Michael Fassbender. Maybe only in the Alien movies, but
Yeah, I was gonna say I think he's only in Prometheus and Alien Covenant.
Only reason he's in there is so that he can, because of contract negotiations. Although he's really good in those movies.
He is.
Well,
yeah.
he's really good in Prometheus, I should say. The one thing that I thought was interesting about the movie is, like, by the time you actually get to the duel, even though the duel itself is really exciting and really interesting and engaging to watch, it almost doesn't even matter. And I think some people might see that as a bad thing. But to me, I like that aspect. Like, they put so much emphasis on this duel that ultimately doesn't really have, like, it's old. People never do it anymore. It will soon be outlawed. The actual truth of it has been revealed to us. So the duel is mainly just, narrative tension. Unless you know the history behind it, it's mainly just narrative tension. But I think it is interesting that, like, it takes such a back seat. I think that's a good choice. I can see how some people might be like, the whole point of The Last Duel is to watch the duel. And it's like, well, no, not necessarily. Sometimes the point of the movie is not the capstone piece. It's seeing what leads up to that capstone piece and realizing, like, how insignificant something like trial by combat really can be.
Yeah,
especially
well,
in a
even though it has
world.
incredibly potent narrative stakes, like who lives, who dies, find out.
Who tells your story? Sorry.
It's
a
like
Hamilton
the
reference.
duel itself is weirdly, like, not that important in the story, because it's like, yeah, we already, like, the story is pretty much all told by the time it actually happens. It's just sort of like, well, we need to have this now to wrap things up. And the duel itself, yeah, it's really good. Like, it's action packed, it's compelling,
Fucking brutal.
it's well shot, it's very brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is also, I don't know if I kept thinking of Gladiator while watching this movie and thinking of how the action sequences were filmed in that versus in this. And I think I think Ridley Scott's, taken some more cues from contemporary action movies lately, because there's plenty of handheld camera work in Gladiator, but it's generally from further back, and, like, there's a bigger focus on, like, geography and making sure you can see everything, and the handheld is there to bring, like, tension and dynamism to it. Whereas now I think he, like the percentage of handheld shots are probably the same, but they're way shakier, they're much closer up to what's happening, and they also have that, like, a little bit of that Gareth Evans flavor where, like, they follow people moving as opposed to just being handheld and giving you, like, a framing of what's going on.
Yeah, the camera operators are... Do you think it's better in this than it was in Gladiator?
I don't know, because I think I still like the action. I think I like the action scenes in Gladiator more than in this. But it's something I couldn't help but think about.
I feel like he's been doing action the same way since, like, probably even before Gladiator. But Gladiator is the movie everyone realized, like, oh, this is how you shoot chaotic action. Because I remember it was after Gladiator that everyone was obsessed with this, and then the Bourne supremacy is what took it to, like, the absurdist level it's at now. But like if you rewatch Kingdom of Heaven,
it's still crazy how like everyone took the wrong lessons from the Bourne Identity, including the Bourne Supremacy.
That's what happens when you switch directors, man. But like even the fight scenes in Kingdom of Heaven is a really interesting movie to watch from an editing standpoint, because there's a lot of weird things in the 2000s, like digital zooms. There's so many zoom shots in Kingdom of Heaven that it's just really strange. Like they feel really out of place. But the combat, I would say, like as far as combat goes and being able to register it, Gladiator and The Last Duel, it's probably Gladiator's number 1, Last Duel's number 2, and then Kingdom of Heaven is number 3. It's very hard to tell what's going on as far as the action scenes in Kingdom of Heaven. And he fixed some of those problems in this by having them in different colors or by keeping with significant characters. But I mean, to me, he's been shooting action the same way for like 20 years. Like multiple cameras cut between. And a lot of the, like if you go back and rewatch like Gladiator or even Kingdom of Heaven, and probably even in this, like a lot of the shots of actual violence do not connect to each other. The flow of it is so abrupt. Whereas like in something like Saving Private Ryan, which was the other movie that everyone was like, oh, we can do handheld camera for action work. Well, yeah, you can. But in Saving Private Ryan, those handheld cameras hold on the image a long time until they move onto a new thing. And that new thing they move on to is immediately cut to at a different angle. So like the clarity
I was gonna say
there a lot more in that movie.
That's kind of my impression of Gladiator, was like, yeah, it's a lot of shaky handheld camera, but it's from further back and it's holding on what it's looking at for a much longer time. Also, you know who really pioneered the use of handheld for action? Ridley Scott in Blade Runner. Because I think,
or even in The Duelists.
Yeah, well, I actually haven't seen The Duelists, so I can't comment.
I know. We should rewatch it because I haven't seen it in a while. I remember I was kind of nonplussed the first time I saw it, but I really want to rewatch it, especially
also just from a title perspective. Like this would have been a great movie for him to go out on, like starting his career with The Duelists and then ending with The Last Duel.
Like, I was thinking the same thing. Perfect. I was thinking the same thing, but he's 83, man. If he's anything like Clint Eastwood, he's got another 18 movies and 5 children in him. Yeah, it is really interesting. Like, it would be fun to watch this movie contrasted with The Duelists, which kind of covers similar but different territory. Mainly, like, there's kind of a weird rivalry in this movie. It's such a weird rivalry because it's such a one-sided rivalry. You know, Legree doesn't even realize he's in this rivalry until it's like, you will call me sir. Like, I guess you are upset at me. I didn't realize you were that mad. We can be friends still. No, we can't. Oh, okay. All right. Fuck you. It's the weirdest thing. We talked about how they did a good job of, like, unlike Rashomon, which retells the same story but restages it differently. You did talk about how this movie actually has a lot of points in the movie where the storytelling is consistent, but significant moments change it up, and stories give different information depending on what's relevant to create a full narrative.
Yeah.
So you could actually, I'd be interested to go in, grab the whole movie, and then recut it to be in sequence like a normal story as an exercise, not necessarily as like, this is how it should be, recut, but like, because a lot of the scenes, you can reslot them in and create one long consecutive timeline of like, this is the traditional Hollywood narrative of the way the movie would be. And then if you really wanted to show it was different perspectives, you just tint each storyline differently, like Soderbergh does in Traffic. But I'd be really, like, I thought that was really smart that they tried to cover as little retreaded ground as possible. Every single story introduces significantly new information, which is one of the ways I think some people have complained about it being very repetitive. And to those people who complained about that, I would say that, like, you clearly weren't paying attention to the story, or you found the very beginning of the story boring.
Yeah,
because
I think one thing the movie does really well is in how it retells the same things over and over again. where it's like for things that are consistent, they will recycle the exact same shot. For things
Sometimes,
where
sometimes.
yeah, or like for things that are like the tone is consistent, but the events are different, they'll recycle the same shot, but what happens in the shot is different. And then when the events and the tone are different, they will set up a different shot entirely, but then only subtly change the actual event.
Yep.
So a good example would be like the very beginning of the movie is the Battle of Limoges, which both Jean de Carouge and Jacques Legris were at, and they both viewed differently.
Yeah.
A lot of the shots of like objectively what happened are identical. Same camera placement, same movement, you're seeing the same thing. But then when it goes into how they view the battle differently, those shots, the camera placement is still the same, the movement is still the same, but what happens is different because like the tone of the battle is the same no matter what. It's just each guy remembering things happening a different way. Versus the rape scene, for example, when Jacques Legris enters the house and he's chasing down Marguerite, you know, from his perspective, it's shot over over his shoulder, so you're seeing things from his view. He says, his lines about how he's in love and how like Jean de Carouge doesn't appreciate her and how he understands her and all this stuff. And she kind of runs back up the stairs and so on. And he says his lines and they're standing in various positions. And it's all shot on either like steady cam or on a track over his shoulder. And then when it's from her perspective, he says the exact same things in the same tone, but they're standing farther apart. It's shot over her shoulder and it's shot handheld.
Yep.
And that makes all the difference in the world because it's like from his view, like all the events are the same. He says the same words. She is kind of retreating and he's advancing, and they're in the same place. Everything is the same. The events are the same, but the tone is different. Whereas it's like, we have it from his perspective. It's more of like a seduction, like a playful seduction sort of thing. Like he's advancing, she's running, and they're like chasing each other in a weird way. And then from her perspective,
she's running for her life.
She's running for her life. It's shaky. So like everything all the words he says are the same, but it's got this very menacing tone because the camera is shaking. She's very nervous. And then from his perspective, they're standing very close to each other. So that's like kind of that, like they see eye to eye, they're close together. Like there's that physical closeness, underlies an emotional closeness where like he believes they're both in love with each other.
Yep.
Whereas from her view, he's standing at like one end of the hallway and she's standing at the other, which, again, it changes the tone of the scene. It shows that he's on his own. Like he's got his own ideas. He understands things a certain way. And she's all the way on the other side being like, what the fuck is happening? And it's like shit like that is why this movie is a shiny and chrome to me, because like just those two shots contrasted with each other and all the work that they do in such very subtle ways are just so brilliant.
Yep. There's also like in his perspective, like when he lifts her up and you hear her kind of like, they do such a good job of towing the line, right? Because she's like, no, no, no in his version, but in her version, she's like, no, stop. And then he like lifts her up and it sounds like it could either be her laughing or her crying in his perspective. Do you remember that part?
Well, what I remember, what I really remembered is in his version of the story, when he lifts her up, their dance and their moves are almost exactly the same as at the beginning of his story when he lifts up that one prostitute at the party.
Yeah. Yep. That too.
Whereas in her version, like when she screams for the servant, she's like, it's not like, hey, is anyone home? Are we home alone? It's like, please, someone come help me. And then when he picks her up, the choreography is different. She kind of drops her weight down to the floor like a child would almost when they don't when a kid doesn't want to, like they're tired of walking, so they just sit on the ground. It's like that. It's like that kind of instinctual, like, I don't want this to happen. I want this to stop. So she just drops all her weight into the ground, and he is like he's really struggling to kind of like lift her up from there. And she's like, no, please don't. Whereas like in his version, like he just picks her up easily. And it's like, it's really hard to pick up someone who doesn't want to be picked up, you know?
Right.
Because people, their weight's not distributed evenly. It's not like picking up a log. Picking up a live person is very difficult if they don't want you to. Yeah. Unless you're a wrestler.
The other thing is when she starts, like, when he picks her up, from the time he picks her up and throws her on the bed, I don't think they ever actually show her face the rest of his perspective. Like, he just does it, like, either her face is clouded in shadow. They might use a digital effect to, like, obscure her facial features,
or they're turned around,
or she's turned around and he's looking at the back of her head. And I was like, that right there, that's good like, that's excellent directing. That's knowing exactly perspective, understanding perspective. Oh my god, like Ridley Scott,
because he doesn't see her, he doesn't see her reaction, he does
not
her
see
emotions.
her, he does not care
he sees
about
what he
her.
wants to see.
Exactly. So good.
And so it's like, you know, he picks her up pretty easily and throws her on the bed, whereas like in her version, you know, it takes him a while to pick her up because she's resisting very strongly. And it's, you see her face the whole time, and you see that she's like in absolute anguish over this whole thing.
Like, she's so good. I was kind of hesitant because I know that Jodie Comer's kind of like the new up and coming, or at least one of the new up and coming, you know, actors, because she was in Free Guy and she's in this, and I really didn't like her in Free Guy, but apparently she's really good in Killing Eve, which I really want to watch.
There's like a huge Killing Eve fan base, I think, that loves her.
Yeah, and
but it's like Killing Eve's one of those, it's a BBC show, so I'll never watch it.
I'll watch it because like, as people who listened to last episode know, I'm a relative fan of Phoebe Waller-Bridge's writing. So I'll be interested to watch the first season. And then Emerald Fennell, who did Promising Young Woman, was the showrunner of the second season. So I'm like, all right, I'll watch at least the first and the second season. And then from there, we'll see what happens. But like, apparently Jodie Comer does a bunch of different accents in the movie. And then in Free Guy, she puts on a bunch of different accents. I didn't love Free Guy. I'm the only one in the world who didn't absolutely love Free Guy. I thought it was really clunky.
So you're saying she's the female Mike Myers? Her whole thing is putting out a bunch of different accents.
She's do you remember when Orphan Black came out and everyone was obsessed with Tatiana Maslany because she put on like a bunch of different accents?
Yep.
It's like she's the new Tatiana Maslany. She's like probably not going to go anywhere, but like 20 years from now she'll be cast in a Marvel movie and people will be like, oh yeah, her, she was supposed to be the next big thing, but then she unfortunately starred in a Jake Gyllenhaal movie that no one saw. I think it's gonna be, no, I don't know. I hope she's good. She's kind of like a Cate Blanchett to me, where like Cate Blanchett's known more for like her acting prowess than anything. So, you know, yeah. So she was good. I just wanted to give a shout out because I feel like we didn't shout out her enough, or her commitment to the role, and that like it is very difficult to do what she had to do, which was like toe the line so many times between sort of like, I think in her story when she's talking to Matt Damon and she's like, see, you just pretend to be flirty and pretend to be nice, and then everyone thinks you're nice. And it just underlines in Adam Driver's story when he's just staring at her because she keeps looking at him as she's talking to Matt Damon, and it's like, again, oh my God, this is such good direction. Or, I mean, you could even say that was in the screenplay, like, you know, he looks at her, blah, blah, blah. And then in the thing, it's like, it's that same scene as when he looked at her, except now, you know, it's like, oh, so good. So, yeah, I don't know why this is just like a witness to me, but I do think everyone should see it. Like The Green Knight, it's like you should definitely at least attempt it.
Well, it's just like, I think it's one of those movies where it's like, like Ridley Scott's performance might be the best performance of all. And it's like it's worth, I mean, it's worth seeing for a lot of reasons, but if I was to pick one, or at least my favorite reason to see it, it would be that. Because everything he's doing is very like filmmaking 101, but it's at such an advanced level. Like what he's doing isn't revolutionary or experimental or anything, but it's like it's like the basics of like cinematic language executed perfectly by a master. 100%. And it makes you appreciate like how hard it is to actually do that.
Yeah, and let me see here. I need to click on Ridley Scott's filmography of recent, because this feels like the first movie in a while that has been. Oh yeah, it's because it is the first movie in a while that's been worth seeing by Ridley Scott. Okay, so he did The Counselor with Michael Fassbender as well.
Okay, that's right.
No one remembers that movie. I hear the director's cut is really good though.
What the fuck?
Of Cameron Diaz fucking a car.
You know, I still have to see Titan, but I wonder if Julia Ducournau is a fan of The Counselor.
Why? Does someone fuck a windshield in that?
Someone fucks a car in that movie, yeah.
Turns out she's a fan of Crash and The Counselor.
I'm sure she's a fan of Crash, given the kind of stuff she makes, but I don't know about The Counselor.
So did you see All the Money in the World?
No.
I wonder if they'll ever release the cut with Kevin Spacey in it. 80%. It's got a good rating on it. I feel like I would rather watch that one show where Brendan Fraser plays the role of Mark Wahlberg.
Wait, All the Money in the World has an 80%, or this?
All the Money in the World has an 80%. This has an 86%. A lot of people are like, oh, the world of its commentary on institutionalized misogyny is not as good as it could be. And I'm like, I know, but that's kind of the point. Like, it very much just represents the society. Well, anyway.
Well, I was going to say it's...
Go ahead.
It's... I don't know if it's a commentary as much as it is just a representation. It's like... I mean, there are parts of it that are commentary, and I think those are the parts that annoyed me, because they do kind of pull you out of the movie when it feels like the writers are speaking to you. Mm-hmm. But, you know, taking the commentary aside to where it's just a representation of, what was the term they used? Systemic misogyny?
Institutionalized misogyny,
whatever. To the extent it just shows that for what it is, it's really effective. And it executes really well on that front.
Yeah, they actually use the word systemic misogyny. So institutionalized misogyny I pulled out of my ass. But but given that Ben Affleck's character in it is like, I'm going to send my pregnant wife to bed for our 8th kid and then go and fuck all these whores. Like, I'm pretty sure it was institutionalized at that point. But I agree, like, it's most effective because it tries to just show it as you know, honestly with an asterisk as possible, because obviously they're going to take liberties with it. They're also going to like push up this
accentuate certain things for dramatic purposes, you know, because you want to have drama if it's going to be interesting. It can't be a documentary where they're just describing shit.
It can't be a documentary where it tells the truth all the time, even though documentaries don't do that.
I mean documentaries and just like saying things to you.
Right.
Like, this is how it was. This is like this. This is like this. It's like, well, no, we got to show you how it is.
But
and
I
like,
would
to
even
the
say,
extent,
like,
again, to the extent that they show you how brutal the world is, that conveys its point a lot better than people saying how brutal the world is.
Yes. Again, it's really, I think another thing about directing is like, it's really hard to know when to just try and portray it in your sort of hyper realism, because like you're right, Ridley Scott is putting on a hyper realistic version of the Middle Ages, but at the same time, you know how we got into like a couple of movies in a row where we were like, this is a movie that shows how shitty it is to live in this society. I feel like very few movies have gone to great lengths to show how shitty it feels to live in a society in the medieval times like this does. Like, I'm watching this and I'm like, my God, everyone looks like they have nothing but body odor. Like, Matt Damon looks disgusting. Anytime someone gets a wound, I feel like they're gonna die. Like, Matt Damon has this fever and he's like, it's just a fever, and I'm like, you're gonna die from that fever, dude, because they don't have proper medicine. And like, it's been a while since I've seen a movie that's that honest about how shitty it is to live in that society. And so that's another thing I really appreciated about this movie. So like being able to show something as it is, as honestly portrayed as possible, can do better than being like Marguerite coming up and giving this big speech to the audience about how my world is horrible. It's like, no, you showed me that your world is horrible. And what's even worse is like, you aren't able to even comment on it. Like the restriction of not being able to do that to the audience is even more telling than if you actually told us.
Yeah, well, it's like it's one of those things where it's like by showing how the world works and just kind of letting the audience absorb it instead of telling them how the world works, you can kind of, I don't know, my brain's kind of shorting out. I had like
it's okay.
The last half of the sentence completely fell out of my head.
It's okay. I can change gears. Just one more gear change.
Fuck. What was I gonna say? Shit.
The society at large and how shitty the society is and how her place in society is kind of shitty.
Yeah, I had a point I was gonna make, but it's completely gone now. I think I was trying to say something like, by showing and not telling in these very clear, clever, and effective ways, it really drives the point home. Like I don't know. This is such like a limp dick sentence now.
It's okay.
It's because like my brain is completely short circuited. Because you're right. Like
Jean de Carouge.
It's like you said,
sentences.
she can't comment on. Now it's coming to me. By showing this in this way, you're kind of exposing things that everyone takes for granted.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're all born into a world, we're socialized, and then we just sort of take the world as it is. It's like, this is how it is, and that's kind of it. Like it's a fact and not something that people over time collectively just kind of came up with. So I think that is something the movie does really well, where all the people who live in the world of this movie take the world as it is. They take everything about it for granted. They're like, this is the way the world is. End of story. But then we, as the audience, are given the tools to think critically about it and see, like, well, is it the way it is? The way everyone just kind of takes it for granted to be? Or was it made this way by conscious and unconscious choices that millions of people have made over time, which then opens the door to, how could it be different? And I think, like, you mentioned Marguerite not really even being able to comment on how shitty her position in life is. Like, that's, I think, an important part of that almost, because to an extent, as much as she pushes back on things, she also is a part of this world and takes a lot of it for granted as well. She's like, this is the way it is. I don't like it, but it's the way it is. And Matt Damon's mother, same thing. She's like, I hate a lot of things about the world I live in, but this is it. Like, change is not possible. And I think that, the movie does such a good job of showing how, like, stuck in this world these characters are, while also giving the audience the ability to think about the world they live in and say, like, well, it's crazy that they don't notice all this stuff. Like, they don't think about all this stuff. They just take for granted that this is how the society is. Take it or leave it. That's it. End of story. But then that also reflects back on us in our time, in our world, and saying, like, well, okay, like, what kind of a world did you grow up in? What aspects of life, or the country you live in, or the city you live in, or the social circle you live in, like, what aspects of those do you take for granted? What aspects of those do you just kind of believe are the way they are unquestioningly? And how could they be different?
Which is why I think period pieces are so, like, important especially period pieces like this. Maybe not like all of the stuffy British dramas, But like something like this is important because like that's fairly profound, kind of on a, I think it's profound. Like the world is bad, and it is a lot easier for us to look at other people's problems and diagnose those, right?
Well,
and
it's like it's why mentally ill people or people dealing with issues in their personal life are probably better off seeking a therapist than A, dealing with them on their own, or B, talking to someone that they're very close with about them, because it helps to have someone who has no connection to you, no like need to like you or be friends with you or get something out of you or relate to you, listen to your problems, and be able to take that kind of distanced, far away, objective perspective because they don't have any incentive to see things otherwise, and say like, oh, well, this is your problem,
Yep. I agree. I don't mean to change subjects, but when you were talking about it, you said like, the people wouldn't even think to try and change their position. The one person who does try to change his position as in a strange way is like Jean de Carouge goes to the courts and is like, this is unfair. But because of the way that the system in the society works, and because Ben Affleck is related by cousinry to the king, it's like his feeble attempts to change the way that it works, which aren't even that effective on changing the way that things work. It's just trying to get his whatever justice is owed to him, like fall completely flat. And his inability to, like, he wants to better his own life, but he doesn't want to better it by working inside of what he has. Like, I think that was also really interesting to me because like he could easily just start collecting rent and making sure everyone pays on time. And like, that's a little over the head where it's like, what? Aren't you guys going to be hard? No, he just never collects. So we put in something extra. I'm like, I'm pretty sure the serfdom wouldn't want to actually put extra money in there. But like, it's very effective to think like, yeah, we sometimes, it's an important balance looking for outside help as well as looking inside to see what our deficiencies are, and not being so prideful that we can't accept the help of others. Not thinking that we're the best ones for the job, like with the horse master. The horse master knows how to take care of horses. Let the horse master take care of horses.
Well, what's interesting...
Conduct the orchestra.
I think the thing that really frames the movie really well at the very beginning, at least for me, was, the movie starts off with kind of the preamble to the duel. So it's like everyone suiting up and getting ready, and then the rules of the duel are announced, and right before they take off, then the movie begins by going back in time to tell the stories that led up to it. But while everyone's getting ready, they have this announcer guy reading the rules of the duel, and there's a line he says where, combatants shall not be allowed to use weapons that were forged through witchcraft, embedded with runes or charms. And like when he said that really struck me. This is like in the first 2 minutes of the movie, like 120 seconds in, this line comes up. And that almost, for me, that set the tone for the whole movie, because it's like that, like, that's wild. That's wild that like they thought that shit, that, it's like, witchcraft is strictly prohibited. Any weapons imbued with magic or charms are illegal for the purposes of this duel. And it's like, what the fuck? But that's how people just believed that shit. They accepted that like this was part of the world. So it's just like, it's like if something that ridiculous was accepted at that time, that kind of that like that's the little nudge that opens the door for the rest of the movie to take you on its journey. Is it's like, if they just wholeheartedly believe something that ridiculous, like what else is wrong that they just all accept as being, oh yeah, that's how it is.
There's a line in the movie that made me think of Kingdom of Heaven, of course. And they're like, oh yeah, if you're not if you're not wet and you're not climaxing when your husband is climaxing, of course you can't conceive. But if you take this medicine, it should help down there. Oh, and God's grace, of course. Like, the throwaway, like, oh yeah, and God has to be in the room as well to help you out. And like, there's this moment in, like, I contrast that because it's kind of like they so believed in God's will and all of this stuff. And that's contrasted in Kingdom of Heaven, where it's like, okay, well, you broke the arrow. It nicked like the bone, so the marrow will start pouring out of you. And you're either going to die from it, because it's going to enter your bloodstream and it'll poison you and you'll die, or you're going to grow a cyst and you'll live. And like David Thewlis is just like, your life is in God's hands now. And it's just like, that is a good way of putting it. Like, it's a random chance. So you, you better hope that chances are on your side. And of course they're not. And Liam Neeson dies because it's Liam Neeson in the, late 90s, early 2000s movies. But like just that contrast of like, there's the rational, like, yeah, God will help you out, where it's like random chance and maybe he's in your favor and maybe he's not. Contrasted with this movie where it's just like, God will dictate everything. God is everything. And everyone's kind of looking around like, yeah, that's the way it is. And the audience is looking at it like, this is ridiculous. How can people believe in this?
I know.
I wanted to talk just quickly, because I know that we're running up against it. About, because we mentioned in the beginning, like, this is sort of one of the few or last really expensive R-rated movies. This is probably going to be the last expensive R-rated movie released this year. The other one being The Suicide Squad. And like, it feels like this is like the Viking ship that we're all lighting on fire and sending off as no one's going to see this, like, because it's an incredible movie.
Yeah.
And it's really sad that, like, this might be I feel like we say this every year, though. This might be the last big budget R-rated movie for adults that we'll see.
I don't think there'll ever be a last one, but they're just getting fewer and further in between.
It's also hard because, like, everyone went and saw Halloween Kills instead of this, and it's like, I guess I get it.
I mean, isn't Halloween Kills like a giant steaming pile of shit, though?
Yeah.
Like, I've heard the Halloween, whatever the last Halloween one that David Gordon Green did was actually pretty good, but...
I heard that too. And it fooled everyone into thinking... I heard that too. Yeah, it's exactly, because everyone was, like, back on board for the Halloween movie. I think my brother saw it twice, the 2018 Halloween movie. And it's just like, the sequel is a steaming pile of shit, but it's also indicative of the reality of the movie-going experience. When people are like, they should have just released The Last Duel directly to streaming. And it's like, if you release The Last Duel directly to streaming, you lose a ton of what makes The Last Duel amazing. It's made to be seen on a giant screen. Mm-hmm. Like, in some way, as long as you're with a sophisticated audience, when they're saying some of the ludicrous stuff like, does your husband please you? And it cuts to, like, Jodie Comer just being like, and it's just like, you hear the whole audience kind of like uncomfortably laugh at it. It's like, this is a movie that you need to, it's an epic scope movie, and watching it in streaming, or saying like movies like this can only be seen on streaming. You know how I watch movies that I have to stream? I watch them in like 45-minute increments because I'm like, I get distracted or something happens. Like, thank God that the Justice League Snyder Cut had breaks in the middle so I could pause it and do something else and come back. But there's...
Oh yeah, those chapter breaks were a godsend.
Speaking of Ben Affleck being awesome in a movie, because I thought Ben Affleck was awesome in this movie as like a horrible character. He was,
his character's horrible, but his performance is great.
It's just like, Ben Affleck is still like, he lost all that weight and he's hitting it out of the park. Like, good on you, Ben. Good on you, Benny. Welcome back. You can also see some of his like little directory thing. Like, he understands how films work, because I think he brought in Nicole Holofcener. I'm sorry, Nicole. But also like that moment where Jean Le Carré kneels down and he's like, closer. I'm like, oh, that's Ben Affleck directing Matt Damon. Matt Damon, all pissed off, like looks around, like gets a little bit closer, and I'm like, oh, it's so good, so good. But it's like, if this were released for streaming, I think it would ruin a lot of the aspects that make it so amazing. Mm-hmm. It's just sad. It's $100 million to make this movie, and like most people are gonna just wait for it to be released on like Disney Plus, because it's owned by Disney, as is Kingdom of Heaven. And it's just gonna die. It's just gonna die on a streaming platform because it's just not. People aren't gonna want to watch it. I don't know. I just feel like it's a nail in the coffin if you release this on Amazon Prime for people to watch. You know?
Well, who knows? Maybe it wins like a costume Oscar or something, and then that helps give it some juice so people see it.
It'll be pulled from theaters by then. Like, I don't think, I think like.
Well, no, I mean like rent it or see it on streaming.
Yeah, it should win for production design. The production design in this movie is amazing. Like,
did you see Dune yet?
I have not. Have you?
Oh, okay. No, I haven't.
All right, I'm seeing it tonight.
I feel like all the stuff that this could win an Oscar for, Dune is like the other big contender. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens there.
That would be interesting. You think Zendaya is going to win over Jodie Comer for Best Actress?
Well, no, not that.
Oh, you're talking about the production side.
I'm talking about like production design, art direction,
editing.
cinematography, editing, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Like,
Jodie Comer could win an Oscar for like Best Actress or at least Best Supporting Actress.
It's gonna be such a shame to be like the person who has an entire third of the movie devoted to her, Best Supporting Actress.
Well,
like,
it's weird because this is such
Academy.
an ensemble movie, but
it is.
Yeah.
I guess so. Like in a movie, so the Best Supporting Actor Oscar came about because they wanted to honor like the character actors who would never be nominated for Best Actor, like the
Peter Lorre's of the world.
Yeah, and now it's just like leading men star as supporting actors so that they can get their easy Oscar win.
Well, sometimes the Best Supporting race is harder than the Best Actor race because like the performances are better.
Yeah, because you're free. You don't have to carry the weight of the movie, of leading the movie on your back. Which is why Ben Affleck is really good in supporting roles.
I know. Well, it's like I remember there's been some Oscar races where it's like the Best Actor field, there's like a clear favorite, whereas Best Supporting Actor, like everyone's really good and they're like amazing for 2 scenes and then they're gone. And it's like extra memorable because they're only in there for 2 scenes.
Matt Damon wins an Academy Award this year, but it's for No Sudden Move. Oh man, Matt Damon had a good year. Like, I think he's really good in this. Obviously they're all really good in this. Even Adam Driver, who the movie continually tries to make us think is the most handsome. But it's just sad to think that like, kind of like for a while, the only really good movies we were getting were like independent films, and occasionally a studio would put a lot of money towards like a big budget Academy film. Like this feels like a big budget Academy film. This is like,
it does.
This is in the right direction, but no one's seeing it. Like, this is one of those movies where it's like, yeah, this is what I would want to win for Best Picture. And it's just not gonna, I mean, it's not my favorite of the year, but it's definitely on my list of favorites, I think.
Yeah, it was really good.
Oh man. Well, if you want to hear other movies that I liked this year, where can they go?
So you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and YouTube. We also have underthewheels.com where we publish like reviews and like opinion pieces and other just little fun stuff that you can read. And like, subscribe, leave a comment, all that good shit. We can also be reached at video@underthewheels.com.
Very good. You have anything else to say about The Last Duel?
I think that's it. It's a low shiny, I guess, for me.
It's a high witness, but I might change that over to like a low shiny just because like it feels like it deserves one.
It does. That's the thing. It feels like it deserves a low shiny.
If any movie deserved a participation trophy, it's this one.
It's like B for execution, but A for effort.
Yeah, this is if you're listening to this, our recommendation is definitely go and see it. I remember because my wife wanted to know if she should see it, and I'm like, it's so hard because like the over the top violence of like Matt Damon pushing people into his sword or beating someone with chainmail like will throw you off, but the rest of the movie is so fantastic that it's so hard for me to say like, the violence might put you off a little bit too much. But, go see it. On that note, I'm Matthew,
And I'm Gabe.
and you've just been Under the Wheels.
So I'm thinking for the YouTube, card.
Yeah.
You could either do Matt Damon with those like wraparound sunglasses, or Jodie Comer in Joker makeup saying "We live in a society."
Just quickly, so things I was thinking about when editing the No Time to Die episode. Like, did you hear about all of that stuff with Robert Pattinson? And they were like, "Oh, who should play the Joker in Robert Pattinson's Batman movie?" And people were like, "Kristen Stewart." Did you hear about that?
I heard something like that a long time ago, and then I think it popped up again recently.
Yeah, it's been getting a lot of traction. That I'm fine with that, but the person I realistically think they should just get to play it, and it's gonna sound horrible, is Billy Magnussen.
Oh God, that does sound horrible.
Like, you would think that, because everyone's always like, "Oh, this is my Academy Award winning thing," but like Billy Magnussen, like when he smiles, he just looks scary.
I know.
Just-
Well,
just
it's weird
give
how
him-
the
give
Joker
him the
became
role.
like a prestige role, like Macbeth or something. Like, that's bizarre.
They get Denzel Washington to play as the Joker.
I know. Well, it's like it's like, if you're an English actor like up and coming and you play Hamlet in something, like that's a huge break. It's like, oh, I'm gonna be Hamlet, and then like our version of that's like, oh, I'm gonna be the Joker. I'm gonna be a fucking comic book character.
Oh, it's so gross. Yeah, like they need to just go back and be like, it doesn't need to be a prestige role. We're gonna get this guy who's an over the top ham that people love to hate in movies, and it's fine. It'll work. Billy Magnussen as Joker. It's such a safe pick, but like I think he would actually be really good in the role. It might be too obnoxious, but
Yeah.
I was rewatching the Hobbit movies because Aaliyah has never seen them, and I'm watching the extended editions. And the Goblin King could be so obnoxious if not handled right. And like Barry Humphries does such a good job of making him a memorable enough character without being like a steaming vat of vomit. So
Yeah, I think I still want a Nicholas Winding Refn Batman movie with Tom Hardy as the Joker and Mads Mikkelsen as either Alfred or Commissioner Gordon.
that's so good. Yeah. Who would be Batman?
That's the tough part. I don't know who would be Batman.
Ryan Gosling.
Right, I was thinking like maybe Ryan Gosling could be Batman.
Honestly,
Like
it
you
would
just
work
have Batman
really
with
well.
his mask and his eyes are looking in slightly different directions.
Finished.